All right, let's do this again. Welcome back to episode 7 of the Uper Farmer podcast, or YouTube or blog, or whatever you want to call it, vlog. Hope everyone's doing good today. For tonight, I am smoking the Brick House Maduro. Very dark wrapper, short cigar. Very, very tasty. Not a huge fan of the dark cigars, but they have their time, they have their place. Tonight, as promised, another Michigan beer. We have the Keweenaw Brewing Company Red Jacket. So, as most of you have probably guessed, this is the first stout, or first non-stout that I'm drinking for these experimental series. A couple reasons for that. One, tonight's topic is all about beer, and it's a red. Good red ale. I do enjoy a red. Very, very tasty there. So, like I said, tonight I think the topic is going to be about beer. I am a fan of beer now. I do brew my own beers, ciders. Thoroughly enjoy the process. Do like beer. Not your traditional American beer, the Pilsners and whatnot. As many of you have guessed, it's going to be the darker stouts, followed up by these reds. I do like a good red beer. That's kind of the lighter end of the spectrum when it comes to beer. For me, it was not always something that I enjoyed, actually. Kind of a fun story. I was in college. I actually went to college just by the Canadian border, and it was very typical for us at 19. We'd go over to Canada, have some drinks over there at the bars because we were of age. At least Canada, you were of age at the age of 19. I drank very, very, very few beers. If I did, it was usually like a Mike's Hard Lemonade or something fruity. Usually I preferred more of a hard liquor or some sort of simple mixed drink. Nothing like horribly fruity like margaritas or something. But your traditional Southern Comfort or old fashions and brandy Manhattans and stuff like that. Plus, we usually did a bunch of shots too. I really did not have the taste for beer. I'd had it multiple times before. Growing up, I grew up in the era, the time, and the place when letting a kid take a sip of your beer or two was not uncommon. I wasn't really shunned either. That all changed, though, when one summer I got invited to go to an international Special Olympics game in Ireland. I was going to act as a medical team for the soccer pitch. So I got to work with some athletes, go out and play soccer and whatnot, and have a really good time actually doing sports medicine. At that time, I was still a little bit on the fence whether I was going to go straight paramedic or if I was going to shift over to athletic training. I did very quickly, though, find out that I wanted to do straight EMS. Well, in Ireland, while we were there, beer is very much a part of their culture. Many places, you're old enough to drink when you're old enough to walk up to the bar and order your own beer. So, being part of their culture, I very much got connected with the locals, the other medical team on the soccer pitch, some of the other volunteers who were helping the Special Olympics. And there was a cute little red-headed Irish girl who was absolutely disturbed that I did not drink beer and that I didn't like beer. I told her as much, that I really didn't like beer, wasn't a fan. She thought this was completely wrong on many, many, many levels. So my little Irish Rose took it upon herself to educate me about beer. And it was interesting. the things that she knew. Again, we were pretty close to the same age. I believe I was probably 20, maybe 21 when I went over there. She very much educated me about beer and about the culture and about how to enjoy it. Stuff like you'll see, I don't really ever drink from a bottle or from a can of beer. I put it in a glass, and multiple reasons for that. One, when you do get into home brewing, there's what's called treb at the bottom, little dead particles of yeast, little leftover proteins from the brewing process. Now you can filter those out. You can let them settle, but a lot of times if you're just doing a quick cider batch or beer batch, and you're not artificially carbonating, you're letting the yeast carbonate inside the bottles, there'll be a little layer. That layer can have a little bit of an off flavor. It'll definitely cloud up the beer when you're pouring it if you don't pour it carefully. And especially if you're drinking from the bottle, it'll get cloudy and you can start tasting that little bit of a bitter aftertaste when it comes to the flavor of the beverage. Also, there is very much when you're drinking a beer, there's a smell. There's actually specific hops they'll add to a beer specifically so that it engages your nose when you're drinking. So that's one of the reasons it improves the flavor, the texture, the experience. I also, when I drink a beer, really like to sit down and slow down. And when I find if I drink it in a bottle or a can, I drink a little quicker. When it's in a glass and take the time to pour it, I drink it a little slower. But my little Irish Rose told me also that when you pour the beer, especially the stoutier beers they had in Ireland, it allowed for that carbonation, that head to build. And that head on the beer, especially with your stouts, will actually protect the beer to keep it from getting too aromatic. Beers, a lot of beers don't like to breathe. The exact opposite of like a wine that does like to breathe. So it was really neat. She helped me learn what type of flavors were inside beer. Over in Ireland, as she explained it, of course, Guinness is over there. And their company, they've been in business longer than our country has been independent, which I always found was really, really neat when I was over there. And I saw the Guinness brewery. And it had on there the year 1759 when they were founded. And our country, of course, declared its independence in 1776. So they had already been brewing beer for a good almost 20 years before we were even a country, which was really neat. She kind of showed me around the Guinness factory and explained that Guinness in Ireland actually will make specific stouts depending on the restaurant or pub or wherever that they're giving it to. They'll actually, you can order specific blends. So it really was kind of nice. She took me to different pubs and she told me what to taste for. Some had chocolate, some had coffee, some had a peat moss, the roasted peat moss that you could taste in it. Again, to someone who really didn't like beer, at first I couldn't taste anything, but as she explained the flavors and explained what to look for, it really intrigued me what you could find in these flavors. And I could definitely, at the end of that trip, taste a bunch of different notes, different textures. She also said that, a stout, it's very, very dark. If we know anything about physics, light color stuff reflects sunlight where dark colored stuff absorbs it. So the joke is when you drink a stout, you're drinking pure sunshine. You're drinking light because the light is actually getting trapped inside that stout. That really did kind of intrigue my fascination in beer. I really hadn't thought much of it. I had grown up in a household that drank a lot of light beers and a lot more of the Pilsners. So there really wasn't much character in those ones. So when I realized that there's so much more, I started to enjoy beer a lot more. One of the other reasons I'm drinking the good old Red Jacket from Q&A Brewing Company. These guys are very interesting, the Q&A Brewing Company. I remember I was a kid when they first made their brewery. They opened their doors and started brewing beer up there in Houghton, Michigan. And the reaction by a lot of people was astounding, that this was not a craft beer town. They all predicted it wouldn't last more than a year or two. It was expensive beer. It was complicated. They really were a Bud Light town. But as many of you probably know, Q&A Brewing Company is now a nationally known beer. People come from miles around to go to the brewery and to try out their beers. They have a very wide selection. They're still doing just fine today, which is amazing. Now the UP and especially Houghton and other places up here are really what started kind of a microbrewing revolution, where you now have a bunch of microbreweries popping up. We have state parks up here. Tequamanon State Park actually has its own brewery on site. We have a couple of larger microbreweries that have opened up here in the UP. And a lot of that has to do with that growing culture that we have of microbrewing. So like I said, I got interested in kind of the history. I started to look into the history of beer, started to learn the fun facts. Facts like the first beer they anticipate was probably due to laziness. So what you had is a farmer who probably brought in his crops of barley and had them sit out during a rainstorm in some sort of container. The barley got wet. It decided to start to germinate. And instead of cleaning out this water, it's surmised that he continued to let it germinate. Some natural yeast got in there and it fermented. For whatever reason, either he smelled the liquid inside or tried the liquid, and it was delicious. It probably had some mild relaxing effects to it, and there births the revolution of beer. So interesting. I do kind of like that a potential slacker, procrastinator, is the one who has a product now that is worldwide. You can find beers everywhere. Find people brewing beer everywhere. And it probably started from someone who was just, again, probably being lazy. You see the art of beer develop throughout history. Beer has been a staple for survival at times. In Egypt, the workers were actually paid in beer. And there's actually many accounts, historical accounts, of pharaohs who were running short on beer, and big revolutions and revolts, and even some of what we consider worker strikes were about beer. There's even more contemporarily, there was a factory in Germany that the workers were allowed to have, I believe it was 1 or 2 beers with lunch. New management came in and put a kibosh to that. They said, nope, you can't drink during work. We're going to shut this down. And this business, this factory, had one of the first recorded strikes in that area, in Germany. They went on strike. They wouldn't go back to work until they could have their beers. So it's very interesting that the idea of workers' rights, in some regards, were hallmarked, were set around beer. Go a little bit further on in history, you have monks who brewed beer, and still to this day there's some monasteries that brew their own beers. But back in the Dark Ages, the medieval times, there's a few historians that actually credit these monks brewing beer, and beer was one of the safest liquids to drink. Through the process of making beer, they didn't know about microbials, but when you boil it, It kills off the different microbes that are making people sick, the different amoebas and single cell organisms. Then you throw in the hops that also helps preserve the beer and acts a bit of a natural agent to keep bad microbes out. And then, of course, the alcohol itself has some disinfecting properties. Well, what these monks would do is they would brew these beers. And then when Sunday came along, if you went to church, got your communion, sat through the Mass, on your way out, you were given the equivalent of your growler or your ration of beer for that week. So this had people coming to Mass to, at the end, receive a liquid, a sustenance. It had calories, it had protein in it. It allowed them to survive that next week, but they had to come to church for it. And so then you see a lot of these explosions in religion during this time. Now, there's many reasons why it happened, but in some of these areas it was due in part to the fact that you could go and get beer at the end of Mass. Talked to a couple of priests up here. I almost had one convinced that we should do a Lenten recreation during Lent, brew up some beer, and then people who attend Mass can get some beer to go home with, embracing that tradition. Like I said, I had one priest who got kind of close to letting me do it. Most of them just kind of laugh it off, thinking I'm joking. But it's, again, part of that history. It's an amazing history when you look at it of what beer meant. It's not just some drink to get drunk off of and lose your inhibitions and party with. In many of these time frames, it was a means to survive. One of the reasons why the drinking age is so low in European countries is because stuff like wine or beer was a safe fluid to give people, to have them drink. You'd give it to your children. A lot of times they'd water it down, so it was only a few percent. But it was nonetheless a beer or a wine. So I really got intrigued in it. After I graduated from college and got married, I decided to kind of really dive into it and started to do my home brewing. And I'll admit, the first few batches of wine I had were absolutely disgusting. I still have one of the bottles of one of the first batches of strawberry wine I made. I don't know if I'll ever drink it, or if it's something I'll will to my children and have them drink it. It's about 15 years old, so well aged. Still should be very drinkable, but we'll see. If I ever do crack into that, who knows? But the process of the process of brewing is an amazing process of taking yeast, something that can cause yeast infections, can cause athlete's foot, can cause all sorts of health problems. If you get yeast inside your mouth, you get thrush. Yeast inside of wounds is one of the leading causes of gangrene and having limbs needing to be amputated. But yet if you take that same yeast, mix it in with some sugary water, it produces a product that, again, is very beneficial historically for our survival. And it's just a neat process to realize you're growing a culture, you're growing these colony of yeast. And the interesting thing is if not done right, you can grow some really bad stuff inside your home brews. There are reports every year of botulism. People get sick of botulism from home brews. But if the brewer follows the steps, follows the procedures, keeps it very sterile and cleanly, make sure they do the order properly, it's a very safe drink to drink in most situations. A lot of those botulism cases from homebrew, I should preface, a lot of them are actually prison brew, where prisoners try to improvise certain ingredients. The other thing that's really interesting is the history of alcohol here in the United States. We did have our prohibition for about 3 years where you couldn't have beer, you couldn't have hard liquors, what was targeted the most. Now there was some beers were allowed. The what we almost consider like an O'Doul's, a very light, very non-alcoholic beer. The one interesting thing is the one alcoholic beverage that was allowed was actually hard cider. Very neat history about hard cider and how it was one of the alcoholic drinks that was considered a essential to life in the 1920s when Prohibition was going on. That it was actually exempt in the first Prohibition laws and ordinances. But our connection with alcohol, you find stuff like Welch's, the people who make the grape juice concentrates, would actually print on the back instructions on how to turn Welch's grape juice into wine. During Prohibition, there's some cool photos where it came with instructions on how to basically take your bread yeast, mix some sugar, concentrate out the juice, add them together, how to improvise some airlocks, and voila, you had a wine, sometimes good, sometimes not so good, but again, it was a alcoholic drink. And that was allowed. It was a well-known. That wasn't something secret. It's printed on the label of every Welch's concentrated grape juice. How to brew your own. Even today, home brewing is still regulated. You can't just start making hundreds and hundreds of gallons. Traditionally, again, depending on what state you live in, you can make 100 gallons a year per person, up to 2 people. So you can only have 200 gallons of home brew. Every so often, every few years, I see how close I can get to that. That's a lot of beer, a lot of cider, a lot of wine. I can say with confidence I have never broken that law. I've always stayed under my 200 gallons, usually by quite a lot. If I can get to the 100, it's pretty impressive. But that's interesting that you can very easily do that at home. Takes very little supplies, very little preparation to actually make a wine or a beer or a cider at home. So it's very empowering when people talk about starting to become self-sufficient. When I talk to people, how do you become more self-sufficient? Where should I start? A lot of people are quick to start with a garden, to grow some food, put some herbs in your window, plant a few rows. That's okay. Gardening's not really something I recommend with someone to start with self-sufficiency. Mine will be tell them, you know what? Start with cider. Start with a hard cider. The recipe is very, very simple to make. Pretty bulletproof. There's not a lot of ways you can mess it up. And if you do mess it up, it makes for a good cooking vinegar usually. You can marinate with it. Cook with it if it does kind of sour, although souring it does take quite a bit of making a lot of multiple wrong steps. And when you have someone brew up their first batch of cider, there's a lot of pride that comes with it. To say, I did that. I've equated home brewing a lot to alchemy. You take water and turn it into wine. It's biblical, actually. Jesus did that in the Bible. Granted, he did it instantly. Mine takes anywhere from a week to 6 months, depending on what I'm making. So I'm not going to say I have divine intervention, but it's alchemy. It's taking one product and changing it into something else. And I do recommend anyone out there. I'll probably talk more about brewing in some of my very simple, easy, no-fail, top secret recipe I will be sharing here soon. So make sure you catch that video. But it is, you have this product and there's just a pride that comes along with it. You can sit back and say, I made that. I did this. And that really does spur people on to become more self-sufficient. Well, what else can I make? What else can I do? Stuff like, after you do that, well, do I have to go out and buy, the shelves my wife wants, or can I make them? Can I get some pride in this? Now, granted, the more other self-sufficient tasks you start getting into, that's when you start getting a lot more failures underneath your belt. The nice thing about homebrewing is there isn't a bunch of failures. You will still have, in the end, some sort of product that you made. Again, whether it's going to be an actual yummy, delicious alcoholic beverage, or it's going to be kind of a slightly alcoholic beverage, but in truth, it's not something I'm going to sit down and drink. If you do make a lot of mistakes and turn it into vinegar, it's still something you can use. You can utilize that in cooking. You can utilize that in making other drinks with it. So when someone talks about, I want to become more self-sufficient, I always point them towards cider. I don't point them towards beer. Beer actually takes a lot of discipline. There's a lot of steps and a lot of good timing. Beer can be very fickle when you add the hops, when don't you add the hops, if you try malting your own grains, if you try using a malt extract. A lot of messes are made with boil overs. That's a process and a half. So someone who wants to get into brewing, I always point them towards good old-fashioned cider. It's quicker, too. Again, within a week, you have a product that is more than drinkable. Within 2 weeks, about a week after you bottle, you are going to have a product you can probably put up against almost any other commercially made product out there. If someone has more patience and more time, then I point them more towards wine. Wine really is kind of the lazy man's homebrew. Because the more time you leave it in the fermenter, you let it sit there and let the yeast really mature and the flavors mature, the better the wine will get before you bottle it. So there's been many wines when I have my operation going. Right now I have dandelion wine that has, I think we made it in April or May. I'm trying to remember when the dandelions first popped up here. I think it was in April. It is still sitting in the fermenter. I am 100% sure that all the yeast in there is dead, but it's airlocked, so no air can get in, no little bugs can get in. Fruit flies are usually what carries the mother for vinegar. They can't get inside that airlock, so it can sit there almost for years. I probably will here in the next couple of weeks, maybe a month, bottle up that dandelion wine. That stuff is quite sweet. It's more of a dessert wine. Very, very tasty. Not something you're going to sit down and finish a bottle in an evening, though, that's for sure. So again, if you want to be lazy, I recommend you do some wine. If you want a product that pretty bulletproof, pretty fail-safe, and you can do very quickly, cider. If you want to do something that takes a little bit of time, patience, and very careful measuring and timing, stick with a beer. Beers will do you good. And that's why I really do. Now I really enjoy beer. I never thought I would. If you would have told 19-year-old me when I first went out to the bars in Canada that I would be enjoying beer, sitting down and contemplating the different flavors and looking for a new type of beer to drink every week now, I would probably have laughed in your face. But thankfully to my little Irish Rose who over in Ireland who really taught me about beer, how to experience, how to enjoy it. We went to many different pubs. We went to different restaurants and had beer actually for breakfast. That was an interesting, having a stout. I think it was a stout, a hard-boiled egg, and an oyster. I think I skipped the oyster, but right away in the morning, drinking a beer. One time there in Ireland, we had a beer lunch. There was a specific stout, again, born from a monastery recipe. It was bread in a glass is what they actually advertised it as. It really was. It was chewy. It was very full of proteins. That head on that beer stayed in that glass the entire time you were drinking it. Very full of proteins, lots of calories. Not as alcoholic. Again, at lunch, I don't think I was tipsy, but maybe. It was a long time ago. It was just neat. It was really a neat experience. It's something that if you're not a fan of beer, you don't drink a lot of beer, look into it. Dive into the flavors. What makes the difference between a porter and a stout, a red beer, a pilsner, uh, an IPA? Although I do have to admit that the American microbrewers, they got to get away from IPAs. That is kind of, in my opinion, a very poor excuse for a beer. I'll probably lose like half the followers that I have since I said that. But you do is just load it with hops, and that's all you taste is the hops. You don't get to enjoy the malt. You don't get to enjoy what the yeast does to that sugar, more of the subtle flavors. You're just hit with this intense bitter flavor of a wide range of hops. But I'll get off that rant. If you do like IPAs, good for you. If I'm ever at the bar and you meet me, please don't order me an IPA. Find a red, find a stout, or a porter. I don't mind a porter every now and then. But the history, the culture, the reason why beer really helped the human race survive and in some places thrive, it's actually quite intriguing. But again, it all boils down to the fact that if I had not gone to Ireland and met my little Irish Rose, I probably would not have been drinking beers. I'd have a rum and coke here, or maybe a whiskey, or something else, maybe just a straight rum. So it is something. It's neat to experience those other cultures, other worlds, really open up and be open to trying new things. So anyhow, I'll end it here. Thank you all for joining me and putting with my little beer lecture. Hopefully here in the next few videos, we're going to try and do a couple of how-tos. I'm going to try shooting those and see how they turn out. Kind of get away from these little bit of vlogs. Also check out, kind of cool, I changed my light filter. I'm going to see what it looks like in post-production. But this is the orange filter, and I'm kind of liking the look right now on camera. We'll see what it does in post. Again, experimental. We're just trying new things out. Oh, I do have, if you notice, the audio isn't echoey. I splurged and bought myself a brand new headset, which I'm now going to protect with my life, probably. At least I did buy the warranty this time, so if it does break, I can get another new one. So hopefully the audio sounds a lot better this time. But anyhow, I hope everyone is doing well. Stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you later.